I'm so glad to see that there's a number of guests here this morning. I know that we have some people traveling, and you help make up our number from that. So we're so glad you're here. And I want to always invite you, if you're in their area, come worship with us. We're always glad to have you. The national, I guess it's national, I don't know much about this, the National Powerball jackpot yesterday was 350 million, and I understand this morning it's 425 million. Now yesterday you had a 1 in 375 million chance of winning that. Now today the odds, since a lot more people are buying tickets, and I understand people are just lined up buying tickets for this thing, it's a lot higher probably today than it was yesterday, because nobody won it yesterday. And if this goes on for several more days, there'll be people lying longer and longer, and the jackpot will get bigger and bigger, and a lot more people will be giving their money into that jackpot. Somebody will eventually win it, but a 1 in 375 million chance is a pretty big chance for spending your money to try to win it. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10 says, "The love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves through with many a pang." Now, what I'd like to tell you about this morning is why I didn't fill the bus. I got an offer here. If I'll get 25 people and put them on the bus and take them down to the casino, the Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Dodge City, Kansas, I will get $200, not $200 cash, $200 gambling money that I have to gamble there. And everybody that I put on that bus will get $25 of free play and $10 of food. So if I just got this bus and lined up, that's what you would have got. That's what a lot of people who have experienced this, probably older people in the congregation here, call priming the pump. The old pump you had in your, sometimes even in your kitchen, to a cistern or so forth, a well, you had to put water in it in order to prime it to get water out of it. You'd pump it then, and if you didn't put any water in it, you weren't going to get any water out of it. So what the casino's doing is putting a little money into the people so they can pull a whole bunch out of them, just like priming the pump. Put a little water in, get a whole bunch out. Now, everybody, I'm assuming, is winning at the casino. All the advertisements say they do. There's all kinds of people smiling and laughing and enjoying themselves in a real party atmosphere. So then everybody seems to be having fun in these ads. So I'm assuming everybody's winning. If you weren't winning, you know, you certainly wouldn't be having that much fun if you were losing all your cash. And I see on the newscast people holding up hands full of money that they've won at the casino. And when I was coming home yesterday and traveling around the area, I've seen them all over the area, what you call the jackpot face. These people just with this joyous look on their face, holding up all this money that they won at the casino. Did I say gambling? I'm sorry. I meant to say gaming. Gambling's kind of a bad word, and we don't want to give those people a bad rap by saying gambling. So gaming is the new word. Everybody likes to play games, don't they? Sure, a lot of you probably played games at Thanksgiving. So everybody likes to play games. But you know, I began to add up the figures, and I just couldn't get it to come out. If everybody's winning, how do they build all those nice buildings? How do they pay their expenses and pay their employees? and give a small percentage of money to the state and the county and the city, and maybe some teachers and students that they contribute to education and so forth, to make themselves look like kind, benevolent people who are looking out for our welfare. The Kansas Star down here south of us started out and they built a horse barn. Well, now, it was a pretty nice horse barn from what I could see from the outside. I haven't been in it. But this was 2 or 3 years ago, and they've already made enough money to build a new casino and motel and hotel and all of that stuff. And they didn't do it with their own money. They did it with other people's money. And so there's a great gulf between this advertising that you see all over the place and the reality of this situation. So for the rest of the lesson, I want to give you some biblical reasons why I didn't fill the bus. First of all, gaming is addictive. No one knows for sure how many addictive gamblers there are in this country. There is an estimated 5% of the population, and when it comes to teenagers, that jumps to about 8% of the teenagers in this country. But this only includes what they've identified as compulsive gamblers, and so problem gamblers and others who may not even think it's a problem are all out there, and there's a large percentage of those people also. And nobody really knows how much there is. But there's something in the very nature of gambling that tends toward addiction. The winner becomes eager for larger wins when they start winning, and the loser becomes desperate to recoup his or her losses whenever they start losing. There's some fatal flaws, there's some mind traps that gamblers count on. And I'm just going to mention 2 of them. Some of them get very complicated with all kinds of statistics, and I'd have to put algebra up here or something for you to understand it. But I'm going to just give you 2 rather simple ones. One is referred to as the double or nothing trap. When a person begins to lose, and then they begin to lose and lose and lose and lose big, almost everyone that is a gambler who gambles like this will take the double or nothing chance. That is, you lose the rest of everything you've got, or you can double this pot and you can come out on top and be the big winner. That doesn't mean that's going to happen down at the casino. They're going to give you this double or nothing chance, but it means this mindset is used in order to get people to take more and more chances as they go along, sometimes whether you're winning or losing. So here's this one last desperate chance, in this double or nothing chance, to not only recoup all the things you've lost, but to come out the big winner. And the vast majority of gamblers will take it. Another is the flawed thinking concerning the law of averages. Take a coin, has heads or tails on it, and you flip that coin and you call heads or tails. There's a 50% chance of you winning, 50% chance of you losing, of course. But here's where the problem comes in. If you could flip that coin and it accidentally, just by random chance, come out, say, 20 times with heads. Now, it's possible to do this. It has been done. Not often, but it happens. If the heads comes up 20 times, the average person who is the gambler has this mind trap, and he says, okay, now I got to start betting on tails, because the law of averages is going to average this out, and it's going to come up tails now more because of all the heads out here that it came up. And so I'm going to bet on tails, and they bet on tails, and they bet on tails, and they lose money, and they lose money, and lose money. You know why? Because after 20 times of coming up heads, the 21st time you flip a coin, the odds are 50-50. They do not change. They will not change. They'll never change. But that's a flawed piece of thinking in that people think over the long run, they'll have to average out. And people do this, and they win lots and lose lots of money, rather, because of this. And gambling depends on that. Now, talk about the way people's mind thinks. See, my secretary jumped to a conclusion whenever she put this outline out. What I gave her was an outline that said gambling with a slash through it, gaming is, and in all of these things. In the secretary's mind, she thought anything with a slash to it is to be eliminated. I intended for it to stay in there. But being a secretary, if you put a mark through something, the secretary will eliminate it. See, I forgot. It's my fault that it come out that way because I forgot to tell her to leave it in there. And see, so that's the way people's mind works in certain situations. But one of the problems, or the main problem with gambling is what we read at the beginning. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money. He who loves abundance with its income, this too is vanity. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10. So one of the problems of addictive gambling, of course, is accessibility. The greater the accessibility, the greater the addiction problem in any particular area. If you can get to it, then people will become addicted to it, because a certain amount of people will always become addicted to gambling. 30 years ago, before the boom in racetracks and casino building and proliferation of state lotteries, there was an estimated 1 million addicted gamblers in this country. Today, Gamblers Anonymous reports as many as 15 million addicts. And this touches the lives of 60 million people, family members, employees, employers, friends, people that may try to help them out in some way and play that losing game unless they can break that addiction somehow. The very fact that gambling is addictive is one good reason to stay away from it. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, he said, abstain from every form of evil. In 1 Thessalonians 5:22, and then in Romans 6:16, it says, do you not know that when you present yourselves as someone as a slave for obedience, you are slaves to the one whom you obey? An addict is a slave. They become a slave to that which they're addicted to. So that's one problem. Now, gaming violates the golden rule. On the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus stated what we have been calling the golden rule in Matthew 7:12. It says, therefore, however you want people to treat you, so treat them, for this is the law and the prophets. And that includes the entire Old Testament, the law and the prophets. So all gamblers hope to win at the loss of others. Not just poker, where you do this face to face, but even on the slots. See, you can't win a lot of money on the slots unless somebody else lost their money that went into the slots, because I'm telling you, the house always wins. It's set up so the house always wins. And you think, well, I'm winning from the casino. No, you're not winning from the casino. You're winning what somebody else lost in those slots is what you're winning. The gambler hopes to gain what some other person has worked for and gained it at no expense to themselves. Gambling is about winning. The recreation concept is a wonderful facade. So I hear people say, well, I just enjoy it. It's just recreation to me. I know I may lose some money and I'll set aside a certain amount. But I'll lose that and that's just recreation. No. Gambling is about winning. Let me ask you this. If nobody won anything at the casino and everybody found out, how many people do you think would go to the casino? Maybe a few really crazy people. But nobody with any sense would go at all because they know they're never going to win anything. Gambling is about winning. You can talk about recreation all you want to, but that's a facade. Gambling violates the second commandment also. Jesus said the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, on these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets in Matthew 22:39. Well, thirdly, gambling violates the biblical work ethic. Paul wrote to the Thessalonian church, and in the second letter, in chapter 3, verse 10. He said, even when we were with you, we used to give you this order. If anyone will not work, neither let him eat. And Paul wrote to the Ephesians in 4:28, and he said, let him who steals steal no longer, but let him labor, performing with his own hands what is good, in order that he may have something to share with him who has need. So there is a work ethic in the Scriptures that is very much evident. And people who chase foolish things, get rich quick schemes and things like that, well, let me just see what the Proverbs said about it. In Proverbs 12:11, he said, he who tills his land has plenty of bread, but he who pursues vain things lacks sense. So all I can say is that he lacks sense. That's what the Scriptures say. The American dream was once work hard, make a good living, live a good life in a good nation. And Kansas changed it in one of their ads to the lottery that said have this certain amount that you could win, and it said win the lottery and get out of the nosebleed section. In other words, you'll be down on the front row, and a few people who steal from their employer, well, what? Your Johnny Cash fans be on the front row to hear old Johnny sing too, maybe. So, love of money amounts to greed. Gambling encourages the sin of greed and materialism and covetousness. The appeal to gambling is to make a quick buck, to get rich quick. It's about winning. The desire for money can lead to all kinds of evil, as I read at the beginning of this lesson in 1 Timothy 6:9 and 10. It says, for those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from their faith and pierced themselves through with many a pang. Love for money amounts to greed. And we are warned against that in the Scriptures. Jesus warned individuals against greed in Luke 12:15. He said, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. In other words, this is not the important thing in your life. Paul warned the churches, as he wrote to the Ephesian church, chapter 5, verse 3, he said, do not let immorality or any impurity or greed even be named among you, as is proper among saints. That's in Ephesians 5:3. And in Colossians 3:5, it says, therefore, consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amounts to idolatry. He said greed amounts to idolatry. Covetousness falls into an area of eager longing for something which belongs to another person, and to do so at their expense. Covetousness is condemned throughout the Bible. In fact, the Ten Commandments said, you shall not covet. And after naming specific things, like one being your neighbor's wife, it says, or anything that belongs to your neighbor in Exodus 20 and verse 17. Not only are we not to covet, but we're not to have association with covetous people, or a brother who is. In 1 Corinthians 5:11, Paul said, actually I wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother if he is an immoral person, or a covetous, or idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such a woman. Now he said you're going to deal with these people in the world, but a brother, then don't eat with that person. Covetous Christians will not get into heaven. Ephesians 5:5 says, for this you know with certainty, that no immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of God and Christ. Materialism, as we sometimes refer to it, is called putting material things before your allegiance to God. Jesus said no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and material possessions. In Matthew 6 and verse 24. You'll serve one or the other, but you can't serve both, is what he said. Now, the last thing I want to point out is that gaming, is poor stewardship of God's blessings. My secretary thought I couldn't be sarcastic, too. There are three basic concepts of stewardship in the world today. The communist view, which is pretty much faded out in the world, is that you belong to the state, you have no real rights or title to possess property. And this has pretty much failed in the world, except just some few strongholds here and there now. The capitalist view is that a person can own and control all that he can rightfully purchase. Now, the Christian view is that all things belong to God, including us. And we serve as stewards of Christ during our lifetime here on this earth. Now, you may be thinking, listen, I work hard for my money. I can spend it any way I want to. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And God gives you that freedom. You may have earned your money under the capitalist system, but it still belongs to God, and you and I are simply stewards of the things we possess while we're here on this earth. God said through the psalmist, "For the world is mine and all it contains." Psalm 50 and verse 12. And we are instructed to be good stewards of what God has given to us. In 1 Corinthians 4, 1 and 2, it said, "Let a man regard us in this manner, as servants of Christ, and stewards of the mysteries of God." In this case, moreover, it is required that stewards are to be found trustworthy. Paul's talking about the gospel that had been revealed to him, that he was a steward of that. And he said, whatever you're steward of, you need to be trustworthy. And you know, someday we'll be called into account for our stewardship. Jesus makes that plain in the parable where he talks about a steward. Now, this is not his main point in the parable, but he makes that point plain when Luke 16, 1 and 2, he said, now he was saying to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and this steward was reported as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward." Now, that's just standard. That's trappings of the parable. But what he's saying is, if you're a steward, you'll be called into account for your stewardship. And this is what happened to this man. Well, somebody says, what about just setting a limit? You know, I know that I can go out there and set aside $50, $100. I can afford to lose that, and I'll just do that. Well, let me let Jesus answer. He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful in much, and who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous in much also. Luke 16 and verse 10. Now, I've given you 5 reasons why you should not invest your money in gambling of any kind. I'm not going to go over these reasons with you. I've just got them listed there on the screen. And you may or may not agree with any of them. That's your privilege. You may agree with some of them, not others that I presented. But I presented what I believe to be good advice as well as what I believe to be biblically true. There are whole areas that I haven't touched as to what gambling can do to families. That's a lesson for another day. But I've known people who lost big and then spent a lot of time trying to recover, great difficulty. And you may know someone who's gambled seemingly without immunity. There are some people who can gamble and win and quit while they're ahead. Now, most everybody thinks that's the area they're going to fall into. Okay, I'll go out here, I'll win a big jackpot, and then I'll quit gambling. That's usually very, very few people who do that. I've known some who gamble and lost and quit and eventually recovered through much tribulation. I've got a person in my mind right now that I'm thinking that happened to. He quit gambling and he finally has struggled back from the brink of bankruptcy and losing his family. There are others that are completely destroyed and they just never seem to ever recover economically or mentally from the things that it takes them through and to. So you can take this lesson and do whatever you think is right with you for it. But I would ask you to consider the things that I've said to you. I've been talking about gambling money. But there is another gamble that people have this tendency to gamble that is greater because it is an eternal gamble, and that is gambling with your soul. For example, if you're putting off obeying the gospel because you're betting that you can go and live and do a lot of things in your life and maybe obey the gospel just before your life ends, then let me just say this: don't bet on it. I have known some people who that happened to. I don't know if they planned it that way or not, but it happened to. And I've preached some funerals for some people who it didn't happen to. They never had that opportunity to repent. So if you're putting off obeying the gospel until it's really handy, or something falls into place, or you can change your life before you do it, or something like that, then don't bet on it. And if you're putting off repenting of some sin for the same reason or for any reason, again, don't bet on it. You just might lose in that case. And the problem with losing there is that there's no recouping, no recovery. It's an eternal loss. And you'll never, ever recover or recoup from it. Some of the other things you can recover and recoup from, but you'll never recover from that. And so, if there's something that you need that we can help you with in your life, in your obedience to the gospel, whether it's obedience to the gospel, whether it's praying for you for some sin, or anything else we can help you with, then let me encourage you to come while we stand and sing the last invitation song.